Welcome. That took some time, but we got, I think, everybody who is planning to come in. We have 145 people on this Zoom, which is excellent. Yes. Wow. And again, so there's now 146. So if you have not already muted yourself, please do that because it will get loud and crazy if we all sneeze at the same time. So we're so glad you could be here. My name is Melissa Knudsen, along with Ali Feldman and Lisa Wagner. We are here to bring you strategic messaging framework to you. We are recording, like I said, and we'll send that out at the end, probably tomorrow morning, with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides, along with things that we reference throughout the presentation. All of the links within these slides are clickable. And so when we cite research or messaging toolkit, you'll get that link too. Just go through the PDF. I think everyone's put their name. If you haven't already, put your name in your chat, and away we go. So quickly, who we are, a little bit how we got started. Lisa and I came from red to blue peer-to-peer texting, and Ali was involved in advocacy, organizing, and elections with grassroots groups. They're in Pennsylvania. I'm in Washington, D.C. Collectively, we became interested in this research around this framing, and that informs this presentation. So just quick what we're going to go through in our agenda: the foundations of strategic messaging, understand intensive dog whistle politics, do's and don'ts of effective messages. I hope you've had dinner, because we're going to talk about a 3D sandwich, and we're going to throw in some dessert after that. We're going to break it down and show you the real mechanics, talk about how to put it into practice, and then this runs about 75 minutes. After that, if you just want to jump off, that's fine. But if you want to stay on, we do a Q&A. And we just ask everyone to combine their questions, the things that they don't understand about the webinar or the messaging, and not on specific issues. All right, take it away, Lisa.
Okay, so words matter. I don't know if any of you share my guilty pleasure of reading advice columnists. And if you want to know what Americans are really thinking about, I do recommend you check out Dear Abby every so often. But you will see that they often tell the people writing in that you can't control what others do or say, but you can control your response to them. And it turns out political messaging is similar. The core principles of what we present tonight are based on the work of Ian Haney Lopez, who is a law professor and commentator on coded racism in American politics; Anat Shenker-Osario, who's a public policy expert by training, who brought the linguistic research done by George Lakoff and others out to political advocates; and Heather McGee, who, while working with the Demos policy and research team, developed race-forward progressive policy ideas and analyses for policymakers and grassroots organizations. So, too often, people think good communication is speaking to what people think they can get. Next slide, Melissa. But our goal is to raise that bar and get them to see what's possible and to believe that we can actually achieve that. So with apologies to Apple, this is almost like learning a new language. And actually, a lot of what we teach has a basis in cognitive neuroscience. We humans are driven by emotion. We like to think we're very intellectual and, can just make decisions based on facts. Not really. So we retain positive memories more readily than negative ones. And really, a narrative ideally should evoke positive emotions for it to stick. Nerves that are wired together fire together, which is why if you're hearing something frequently, you're more likely to believe it, even if it's not true. So if you would like to learn more, listen to the podcast, which is linked on this page, where Ellen Bookman, who's president at the Opportunity Agenda, and Dr. Jiggy Geronimo of ISRC, a progressive messaging research group, discuss some of the neurological underpinnings of effective messaging. So people want nice things. What does that mean? Most people, and not just progressives, want nice things. And we're not talking here about luxury cars or yachts, but nice, universally desired things like clean air and water, affordable housing, nutritious food and enough of it, access to affordable healthcare, good schools for our kids, reliable transportation, safe neighborhoods. Nothing too, bizarro there. But as we all know, some people in America and throughout the world have a lot easier time accessing these nice things than other people do. Although some progressive ballot initiatives have passed with large margins, we still see a dislike and a distrust of Democrats and government. And actually, you're seeing that right now in the news where people are saying, well, we don't really need to continue the child tax credit. So why is that? We're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. In her book, The Sum of Us, Heather McGhee explains how before the Civil Rights Act, white Americans welcomed government help in growing the middle class. Think about how many of your parents, or maybe even you, bought their first home with a VA loan, went to college on the GI Bill, or collect Social Security. But after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when Black people started to share in these same benefits, suddenly white Americans saw the US as full of undeserving, not hardworking others. These were people of color, basically, specifically Blacks. White communities went so far as to drain their public pools and fill them with cement rather than share them with non-whites. This zero-sum mindset has been around for a while. Its goal is to keep the wealthy in power while the rest of us compete for scraps. It somewhat explains why certain groups seem to, quote, vote against their self-interest, unquote. Heather McGhee argues that this really doesn't have to be, and by coming together across our differences, we can all have nice things. So, any of you remember Reagan's quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are I'm from the government and I'm here to help"? This was kind of the nail in the coffin in creating a distrust in government. And remember, the primary organizing principle of the Republican Party, and this goes back really centuries, is that a minority of people should be in charge of the majority of people. This is not a bug, it's a feature that has been built into our system since the founding fathers needed to get the Southern slave states to sign on to the Constitution. So dog whistles. Do you know what we're talking about when we say dog whistles? For over 50 years, the opposition has used dog whistle politics to divide us. Dog whistles are coded language that use seemingly innocuous words that some people can hear, and they tend to produce an emotional reaction. And remember, people respond to emotions. On the surface, the language appears normal to the majority of people, but it communicates very specific things to its intended audiences. Dog whistles are generally used to convey messages on issues likely to provoke controversy, but they give the speaker some plausible deniability. Accusations of dog whistling are by their nature hard to prove, but there's we've listed some on the right that are pretty clear, and you may have heard people using states' rights to defend the voter suppression laws that are being enacted right now, for example. Ian Haney Lopez identified how racism is used strategically as a weapon of the rich against all of us. Most of us tended to believe that racism arose out of the personal bigotry of white people and that it only harms people of color. There are times when that is true, but it's really not the whole story. Republicans, the right wing, and the wealthy use dog whistles to weaponize the common human need to feel superior to somebody else, no matter how poor their own circumstances are. Black and other people of color are often targeted as being to blame for their own economic problems, although Blacks and people of color are not immune to dog whistles either because they are also human. But it's done to turn us against each other and maintain the elite's power, which keeps us from seeing who is really running off with our country's wealth. Ian Haney Lopez's Race Class Academy, which is hyperlinked on this slide, goes into a lot more detail and is well worth watching, but it's a very big topic and we can't really cover it in depth in one quick slide here, but it's really worth listening to. So as we on the left work toward building a multiracial democracy that will serve all of us, Republicans, you may have noticed, are doubling down on their playbook, using racial scapegoating, dog whistles, and divisive rhetoric to mischaracterize us and try to paint us into corners. So we need to be aware that while colorblindness is a true physical visual deficit, it is not an effective messaging strategy. Research has shown that not talking about race and class doesn't end the conversation. It just means the only voices being heard are the right-wing name calling. Messaging that leans into and acknowledges our differences, including race, outperforms economic-only statements in rebutting conservative talking points. And Allie is going to take over next.
So let's talk about our audience. How many of you are sports fans? How many don't care about sports at all? And how many might care if your home team makes it to the Super Bowl or the World Series? Politics is the same way. Some of us are deeply entrenched. We follow the stats, the players, and all of the details. We are the activists, but we're not like everybody else. When we're talking about messaging, we have to know the audience, the base. We have to know our audience, the base, persuadable voters, and the opposition. Again, we are the activists. We're deeply engaged. We take action, and we rally others to do the same. The base shares our values. The opposition holds opposing views. And then we have the voters in the middle. They're often referred to as moderates. But as Ian Haney Lopez points out in his article linked in this slide, these voters do not hold nuanced centrist views. Rather, they are conflicted. These voters bounce between progressive and reactionary views of the world. They may gravitate to whatever sounds good in the moment. They hear a pitch and they think, that's a good idea. And then they hear the opposite and they think, that's a good idea. We call these conflicted voters the good point people. Our job is to sell our agenda. We need to make bold statements that take a stand and win people over. Commercial brands spend about 70% of their marketing budget on their super users or influencers. This is our base. We need to sell our message to the base so they will be the messengers and spread our words well beyond our bubbles and inspire persuadables to join in. Repetition and amplification of strategic, coordinated, disciplined messaging is loud, powerful, and goes a long way. As for the opposition, those who do not share our values, we are not going to win them over, so we're not even going to waste our time trying to. So this is what we are up against and why we need to become the loudest in the room, which means repeating and coordinating our messaging. And we need to communicate that we are stronger together in our messaging. So a quick recap. We need to leverage our differences to build a cross-racial, cross-class coalition so that we stand united, fighting for what we want, what we need, and knowing that the other side is trying to divide us so they can increase their wealth and power. We need to win over the conflicted voters, also known as the good point people. And we have to speak up and be the loudest voice, because if we remain silent, the other side will fill the vacuum with their dog whistles and rhetoric. And back to Melissa.
Okay. So, do's and don'ts. So remember, we want to be talking about the beautiful tomorrow that we not only want, but we deserve. And these next set of slides are going to show you best messaging practices and some traps to avoid. So, number one, don't repeat the opposition. When we use the opposition's words, we are allowing them to control the narrative. And if you aren't sure if you're using their story, just look at the word. Interestingly, this myth busting does not work when people are more likely to remember the myth that you're trying to discredit than the truth. So by saying no human being is illegal, the brain just removes the no on that. That's why it's important that we create our own frames, stories, and visions. So number 2, just say no to no. So again, as we said about the myth busting, what you negate, you're basically bringing to top of mind. So when we think that putting a no in front of something is enough, it just affirms the oppositions that those words are true. So we want to be using affirmative demand. Our brains are wired to recall nouns before the small words. So these small words like our parents are not criminals, as you can see in the photo here, what stands out is unfortunately the words criminals. Same as Antifa is a terrorist organization. Or we teach critical race theory in K through 12. When we end up just trying to discredit by saying they don't, or we don't, stop, no, we end up amplifying their framing. So we need to shift the narrative on our terms. And we'll get to the do's. Number 3, numbers and data don't care about your feelings. Data is neither personal nor accessible. People don't connect to data. They connect to values. Data and statistics are great inside voices, but we are talking about outside voices. So what do we mean with inside and outside voices? We're not saying you shouldn't have those numbers in your policy meetings when you're meeting with your team, but when we go out to brand these products, just as Ali said, brands spend 70% for their super users. They don't do it on telling them about the statistics. They talk about the wows of the product. Also, it's a little overwhelming when I see this slide on the left with these numbers, 226% up in prescription drug prices. I'm not sure exactly what that means. First, it's a lot of numbers and arrows. Everything's going up. Are those the prices going up? I thought we were elected Democrats to have prices go down. I'm confused. If I'm confused, think about that base or the conflicted voter. So number 4, really important to not amplify the opposition. We do this time and time, and we should never, ever retweet, quote tweet, like anything from the opposition, even if we are trying to refute or make fun of them. The right wing profits off our rage, literally and figuratively, in terms of fundraising and amplification. We also could be elevating virtual unknowns into stardom. And last, sharing signals to social media platform that it is liked, popular content. So we don't want to be doing that. So another thing that we tend to do is go out with the price tag, and we want to be talking about the wonderful product. This message about Infrastructure and Jobs Act, does it inspire you? It's a lot of numbers, and one could argue that for the conflicted voter, they could say that's a whole lot of money, whole lot of my money being spent. But then take a look at Senator Klobuchar's. What is the infrastructure bill? It means broadband for 10,000 of Minnesotans, and really what that means is kids are able to do their homework at home instead of sitting in parking lots. That's what we want to be talking about, is those values and how your policy or your ideas are connecting to people's personal lives and how they are going to benefit. A list of numbers, I guess if you're into infrastructure and you're going to bid on a contract, but if you're a parent who has to drive their kids and sit outside of McDonald's, this is a big deal. Number 6, the media loves conflict. We don't need to amplify them. Voters are tired of division. They just want to see results. We need to look at what we can do better, and the overall negative focus is just really harmful. Let's replace the Democrats are divided or Dems are in disarray and progressives ruin everything, and let's embrace, the division we're seeing now is what we've always seen between the very wealthy and the rest of us. Positive imagery, not harms. We just want to make sure that mindful that we don't have unintended consequences or reinforce disparities. When we show images of people in cages, sadly, it only further stigmatizes those communities. So we don't want to do that. So what should we be doing? Well, we should definitely be exposing the con. Our opposition, yes, they're barreling towards authoritarianism, but they are also grifters and con men. They're incompetent, they're obstructionists, they're clinging to the past. We want to always frame them as the whiny losers who resort to cheating when they can't win on their policies legitimately. Number 9, it's time we reclaim freedom. Words like family, fairness, freedom, and the future pull very well with many persuadables and our base and our activists. Let's lean into it. All right, social pressure works. What does that mean? It means that people like to do the things that they think people like them do. So specifically with school boards, they get a lot of agitators out there who scream and hold up signs that they're going to do this for their kids, and it makes it seem like they're much bigger than they are, but they are not. And we need to fill that vacuum and show people they're making it seem like there are a lot of people. Well, we need to do the same thing. When we talk about being a voter and your neighbors are voting, we're turning out on records number. Won't you join us? Your friends and neighbors are voting. So those are the messages that really work. When people think that people like them are doing it, they go along. And people also like to be on the side of winners. So we should be celebrating our wins, even if it's a partial victory. We should brag about what we've accomplished and keep pushing for more in the future. So we just really should always be taking a moment to think about what we have accomplished. I always say we used to be, until recently in December, when Honduras was the second country to beat back an fledgling authoritarian government at the ballot box. That has never been done before. It's very hard. We overcame huge obstacles. Then Democrats passed the ARP, and then they did the Infrastructure Jobs Act, and now we're working for freedom to vote and Build Back Better. And there's been a lot of small wins within there. If you're working with the local groups, celebrate those wins, the littlest things. Just keep talking about it. People want to be on the winning side. Focus on the positives. And finally, say what you are for. We have to motivate people who are already working 2 jobs, their kids are in school, they're still in COVID quarantine, we want them to get out and voting. We need to let them know what we are going to do for them. It is not enough to say we aren't the right wing. That's secondary, but we have to explain what we are for. And now I hope you've eaten.
I haven't, and I'm hungry. Anyhow, but I'll just power through. Research shows that not only do words matter, but so does the order of the words. So we call this the values, vision, or the 3V sandwich. So what we want to do with this 3B sandwich is we lead with shared people-centered values. Again, we're talking about emotions here to a large extent. In describing the problem, narrating the villain, we talk about why we don't have nice things and how villains use our differences to keep us divided. These are person-made problems and they need a person to solve them. They're not just going to happen. Vision is the nice things that we can have if we work together. So why do we lead with shared values? Progressives tend to love to start with problems and statistics, and Melissa gave you a few examples before, but people have tons of problems these days and they really don't want to hear yours, to be honest. So why do we lead with shared values? Think about, have you ever been at a party and gotten stuck in a conversation with someone who starts telling you all of their problems? Do you want to keep talking to them? No, you start scanning the room and seeing if you can get away. So we lead with shared values because most of us want similar things and it establishes a we. It keeps the listener willing to keep listening, which is also important. A shared value should name race explicitly to counter racist dog whistles used by the opposition, but it can be done in several ways as we show here, saying most of us, no matter what we look like or where we come from, or we can name color explicitly, but these are things that we all care about. Choices reflect values. So the current New York City skyline on the left is very, very different from what it looked like when I moved there in 1976, and even from when I left 5 years ago. But the picture on the right hasn't changed much in many neighborhoods, and I can assure you of that because I did home care nursing for a number of years, and I've seen those homes. So what's going on? We can build these huge luxury skyscrapers where people have 30,000 or more square feet of an apartment space for a family of 4 that's at most there, once a year. But we can't maintain and create affordable housing. Why is that? That's a priority issue. So for over 50 years, the GOP has been claiming to be the fiscally prudent party, giving huge tax cuts to the wealthy and large corporations while promoting the scarcity myth, the myth that America just doesn't have the money it needs to take care of its citizens. The US is still an incredibly wealthy country, but that wealth is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small percentage of the population. And contrary to Reagan's voodoo economics, it doesn't trickle down. It really doesn't. We need to communicate frequently, clearly, and loudly that our policies and lack of a social safety net reflect conscious choices politicians make, not a lack of resources. So, describing the problem, which is the villain part of this statement. Naming the villain describes motivation and explains why we don't have nice things and how the right uses our differences to divide us. Our enemy is not each other, but those who violate our values. Naming the villain describes the who, which would be some lawmakers, politicians, corporations, super wealthy. The what they're doing, which is prioritizing their profits and power over people. How they're doing it, by dividing us, and why they do it, to maintain their power and increase their wealth. People have sometimes asked us, oh, isn't this just name calling like the GOP does? But it's not. We're pointing out when certain groups, corporations, wealthy individuals, and PACs, some politicians, etc., take specific actions that hurt people. We can't assume that the average person understands why things are the way they are. So the best way to fight this disinformation is to describe the man-made origins, effects, and solutions to inequality. We've got to expose the con, basically. We're all getting screwed is a lot more powerful than finger wagging or here are the facts or you should believe this. There are a few caveats, though, when we talk about naming the villain. We want to avoid saying the government or all politicians or all of any group. People already have a huge distrust in government, which has been fomented by the right for years, so we don't want to give them a reason to have more. Also, we should usually refrain from saying all of any group. Modify it by saying a handful, a few, certain, some. That makes it less overwhelming, and it also avoids the exceptions to the rule trap. It's almost never that all of any group is this or that. We are often also asked if it's okay to name names, and this really is a judgment call, whether you want to name a specific villain like BP Petroleum, the Sackler family, the Koch brothers, you know, you name it, there's lots of villains, versus more general villains, which is what we usually do in our examples in this presentation. You know, some politicians, huge corporations, the wealthiest 1%. This is really going to depend on your organization, the issue, the platform you're using, and your audience. So, you know, we're not saying no, but you want to think about it. In general, also, we want to be careful when using Republican. Unfortunately, it can easily backfire and turn into sort of a Yankees versus Red Sox conversation. It may also alienate some Republicans who still identify with the party that they knew, but not with the current MAGA element that completely has taken over. So if you must, you should definitely just say some or certain Republicans, or if you're talking about a very specific scenario, for example, no Republicans voted for the American Rescue Plan, that's sort of another story. And Allie is going to give you a little grammar lesson, which is very useful.
So when we talk about the villain, we need to use the active voice, not the passive voice. These two slides show the difference between the passive voice and the active voice. Many people lost their homes. Our rivers and streams were polluted, but that's only telling part of the story. Corporate lenders are forcing people out of their homes, and some politicians are rolling back environmental protections and letting businesses pollute our waterways. Things don't just happen. These are conscious choices that people have made. The active voice pulls back the curtain so that we can see that there are real people or villains making these choices and causing harm. As activists, we tend to focus on the victims because we're compassionate and we're empathetic, but we need to shift our attention to the villains who are creating the problems and the harms. The example of the passive voice here, our schools are underfunded, leaves a lot to the imagination. Who, how, and why are schools underfunded? The passive voice forces the listener to make assumptions, fill in the blanks, and often blames the victim about why these things happened, as if they happened naturally, or people made bad decisions, or maybe they did something that landed them in this situation. The passive voice also hides the structural racism and its impact. Obviously, systemic structural racism profoundly hurts people of color, but as a whole, structural racism works against all of us. And again, as Heather McGee's book points out, she dives very deeply into this. In contrast, the active voice, some lawmakers consistently cut funding to our schools, especially those in poor communities, exposes the con, calls out the villain, the action, and the resulting harm. The active voice makes it clear that the actors caused the problem with intent. It holds the actors accountable, and it signals that a problem that is person-made can be person-fixed. Or rather, if it is person-made, it can be person-fixed. So let's take a moment and check in. And we invite you to write in the chat your choice between A or B. Which one is the active voice? So in this first example, fair economy. A, some politicians pass laws that pay for the rich, or B, some workers are not paid fairly. Which one is the active voice? Right. Looks like everybody's getting it. So as in A, we know that it's some politicians. In B, we don't know. Next one, voting. A or B? Which one is the active voice? Right, it's B. So let's take 1 second and look at A for a minute. New voting laws that restrict access to voting, especially in certain areas, were passed. We have no clue who's responsible. Our goal is to call out the villain. So in the active voice, we see that clearly. A handful of politicians, and we know who they are. infrastructure, active voice, A or B? Good. All right, moving on.
Okay, aspirational solutions. So again, we want to be talking about the world that we seek to live in, and solutions need to create something good. So we are not just about minimizing something that is bad. We really need to get over this beggars can't be choosers mentality. So I'm going off script because my beef is that last year we sent two, if you count Virgin, it could be 3 billionaires into space, while we had, thousands of families losing their homes, waiting in line at food banks, you name it. So these are really, there's plenty of money here in the United States. Again, these are choices. The reason that we don't have it is these are choices that are made. So we should aspire to have more. If they can fly into space, we should all at least be able to have basic food and clothing and healthcare. So what does that look like? We need to provide our vision. This signals how we all benefit when we stand together and build cross-class, cross-racial coalition. This is how we sell our agenda, okay? We have to come together so that we can have nice things. This is also less about a specific policy or even a politician and more about what we do when we come together. So when we talk about the Biden administration, voters came together and overcame huge obstacles to vote in new leadership. So we really need to frame it on the voters so that they understand that they have agency. And also, they find it's human. Call to actions. So here's just a couple of examples. We all benefit when everyone pays their fair share and students have the resources they need. This last one, by joining together and speaking up at school board meetings, contacting our local or election leaders and voting to fully fund schools, we can make this a country where every child has the freedom to learn, grow, and thrive. So it's putting in that coming together and then giving people specific actions that they can do. So we've been talking a lot, and now we're going to let you hear how these messages could work if you were to run a visual ad, real time. This is from the Texas Organizing Project, Post-Winter Storm. As you watch this video, listen for those 3 V's, the value, villain, and vision. It's going to take me a second to set it up, but
that all Texans, most of us believe that all Texans, no matter our color or zip code, should have the freedom to keep our loved ones warm, fed, and safe. But for decades, a handful of corporations and politicians have taken power away from our families. They've profited by poisoning our kids' water, jacking up prices. And now that they've put millions of our lives at risk this winter, they're trying to divide us with lies. It's time we return power to our families. By joining together from Dallas to Houston to Brownsville, we can build the reliable and renewable energy systems we need to not only survive the next weather emergency, but make this a place where all families are free to thrive.
okay. So as you heard that at the end, it's not just, we are not going to just get to better electricity and regulated and electricity or when we need it. We want to be free to thrive. It's really taking it to that next level. All right. So I seem to have gotten stuck with the food slides. And so again, apologies if you are hungry, but I'm sure right now your mouth is just watering at this slide. I mean, you really must be thinking, ooh, a half a cup of hot, melted, unsalted butter with some eggs and unsweetened cocoa powder. That is just what I want after my grilled cheese sandwich. Just a delicious dessert. Has that satisfied anybody's craving? Unlikely. Unfortunately, when it comes to giving voters what they need, the left has a tendency to offer a laundry list of policy proposals that the average American just does not understand or want. So we call this the recipe and the brownie. We need to be giving people the brownie, framing our proposals in terms that people can relate to on a personal level. Remember the Amy Klobuchar's tweet about kids can access from home and not from a parking lot, their internet from home and not in a parking lot. So that's the brownie, talking about how you're going to connect with people. So we've made you aware of it. And now we're going to go through a couple of examples that you can understand what the difference is. And you'll probably be a little surprised because, again, we are activists, and what we assume is a brownie. I would say that's a brownie. But again, as an activist, that is my brownie. But as an average voter, that paid family leave really means being there the first time your baby smiles, or being able to take time to care for a loved one that when they need you the most. So that's your brownie. The Green New Deal, besides, it's a good policy, but besides it's been totally weaponized by the right wing, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But when we talk about a bright future and clean energy, locally generated clean energy, that is a brownie. And when gay activists were fighting for marriage equality, what turned rights into, which is a policy or recipe, into the brownie, is love is love. That's something everybody can understand, can get their head around. So now that we've kind of given you some examples, we're going to check in again. All right, fair wages. What would you say is the brownie? Yeah. Exactly. Being paid a wage that covers your basic expenses and leaves you with enough money to buy your kids an ice cream at the end of the month. Okay, that is a mouthful compared to $15 an hour, but I'll tell you, you could probably shorten this. And what this avoids is getting the argument between the Joe Mansions who say $11 an hour, and in California where they're saying $17 an hour. You're talking policy there. What do we want? We want to get a fair wage so you have a little bit of money at the end of the month to treat yourself. Healthcare. Yeah, you guys are getting it. So again, we'll get some people who are just Medicare for all or don't talk to me. Other people talk about a public option. Other people talk about shoring up the ACA. At the end of the day, what we really want is to be able to see a doctor without going bankrupt. All right, so this is going to be multiple answers. Okay. Right. It's kind of all of these. And I know there's some comments in the chat. We'll get to those possibly. All right. So now that you've been aware of the brownie, you're going to start seeing a lot of recipes out there. But next, we're going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to really break down these statements for you.
Hello. So we're going to look at a couple examples of campaign statements that could use a little work. This particular statement was taken directly from a candidate website, and you'll see similar examples on a lot of candidate websites. So take a minute to read it and think, if you're a voter looking to learn about this candidate and his or her positions, how does it read to you? If you want, write your impressions in the chat, and then we'll break it down. Okay. Yeah, there seems to be a consensus that this is too long and too wordy. So in the next slide, we break it down sentence by sentence. Melissa? This is the exact same statement, but along with it being long and wordy, and most of you are right that people probably wouldn't read the whole thing. You see, there's an awful lot of problems in there, right? There are a couple of solutions, but they're kind of buried in the body of this. And, there's a good chance that this candidate would have already lost his audience before anybody even got to the good things that he was saying. So we went and rewrote it. And I just want to say that how we rewrote it is not necessarily the be all and end all, but we do bring in a shared value, which includes everybody. Instead of talking about how, medical bills are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the US, we name who the villains are, and we describe a vision. So, no matter our skin color, again, we are referencing race here, where we live or where we're from, when it comes to our health, we all want to get the care we need without going bankrupt. And again, I'm a retired nurse practitioner. When somebody is really sick, that's all they care about. That's really all they want to hear. Naming the villain, there could be multiple villains in this. We have structural problems, but in this case, we're saying some politicians kept trying to take away the Affordable Care Act to make a political point, even as so many people became sick and needed healthcare more than ever. And when we join together, and here we pull in a little collective action and elect candidates like this candidate, or maybe there's a slate of candidates who support the creation of a statewide public option, all of these state residents could see their trusted family doctor without worrying about networks. That's really what people want to hear. So here's another statement from another candidate website. I'll quickly read this because it's shorter, and then we'll break it down in the next slide. So we all want and we all deserve the basics in life: a steady job that pays a living wage and helps us save for retirement, good health care, a nice home, and a great education for ourselves and for our kids. But in America today, equality of opportunity isn't a reality. And in so many ways, that inequality starts in our educational system. To improve the quality of primary and secondary education, I support increasing teacher pay and breaking the link between a community's wealth and the funding available for its public schools. And again, this was taken directly from a candidate website. So next slide, we break it down, and the first sentence is actually pretty good. We all want and we all deserve the basics in life. It's a good shared value statement. It doesn't specify race, but it's pretty good. The villain statement, though, is sort of, equality of opportunity isn't a reality. Passive voice alert, passive voice alert. This is true, but why is that? It just sort of, is this a shit happens kind of thing? Or have people caused equality of opportunity to not be available to everybody in this country? And the third statement is nice, but it's basically a recipe and policy. There's no brownie or vision. So here's our rewrite. We wrote, most of us believe that all children, no matter their color, background, or zip code, should be able to attend a neighborhood school that has the resources to give them a quality education. But for too long, some politicians have claimed there isn't enough money for our schools while giving tax breaks to billionaires and wealthy corporations. As we all know, school funding is often based on property taxes, which automatically means that rich districts get lots of nice things and poor districts don't. But the vision, by coming together, we can demand that every school gets the funding needed to provide all our children the kind of education that prepares them for a bright future. That's a vision statement. You could also throw in a few brownies, like, that gives all of our children have a school that has a school librarian and a school nurse or something along those lines. But, that can be done on a case-by-case basis. And then the last example is actually pretty good, and this was taken from a candidate website. So people who work for a living ought to earn a living, no matter their race or zip code. But today, a powerful few exploit workers and keep wages down while getting rich off of what we create. They're naming the villain, talking what they're doing, and saying why they do it. But by coming together to elect leaders like candidate X, we can achieve a livable wage so that everybody can be paid enough to provide for their families and give their children a bright future. And Allie is going to talk about the importance of the messenger next. Allie, unmute.
Sorry. So about the messenger, we cannot talk about messages. We cannot talk about messages without talking about the messengers. So messengers matter. Each of you is a trusted messenger. Your ability to speak out, coupled with relationships built on trust and credibility, give you superpowers to influence others. Use your superpowers to advocate, educate, and mobilize people to action. And remember, if you aren't stepping up and speaking out, someone else on the other side is. So be the louder voice. And likewise, build your network of trusted messengers so that people share your messages and push them out to even larger audiences, creating a ripple effect so that your messages travel well beyond your circles. Also, be mindful of the messenger and your intended audience. So communities are rich in culture, languages, and tradition. Messengers need to not only be credible, but also culturally competent and sensitive. You may not be the best messenger for every audience. For example, I know that my family, friends, and neighbors will most likely listen to me, but I do not have the same trust, credibility, or even cultural competence in other communities. And that's okay. Work with allies and partners to find messengers who will resonate with the people that you want to reach. Repetition is powerful and persuasive. As we mentioned earlier, repetition builds memory muscle. Also, the more we hear things, the more likely we are to believe that they are true, even if they aren't. This is known as the illusory truth effect. We've all seen how the opposition uses repetition to drown out the truth. And sadly, we know that it works. But that's all the more reason why we repeat, and repeat our messages so that we rally and persuade our base and bring others along. Also, the more people hear a message, the more desirable it becomes. Think Obama's "Yes, we can," or Dunkin' Donuts' "America runs on Dunkin'." We've heard these phrases so many times, they resonate on a deeper level. And finally, we have to make sure that our messages are compelling so that people want to repeat them. Quality matters just as much as quantity. So here are a few campaigns that proved to be effective with repetition. When votes were challenged in 2020, there was a coordinated campaign to demand to count every vote. And Senators Warnock and Ossoff prevailed in their races against Republicans who perfected the art of dog whistling. They won their races using tightly coordinated messaging focused on healthcare, jobs, and justice. And now we are advocating for the hashtag freedom to vote and hashtag build back better. And finally, I'll add that we cling to Anat Shenker Osoria's mantra, If you aren't sick of your own message, then you haven't said it enough. So you can hear more stories, more success stories on Anat Shankar-Osorio's podcast, Words to Win By. Melissa, you're muted. Oh, sorry.
As we said, we cannot rely on the media to spread accurate messages. They are there to create clicks and conflict. So not all, I will say. So we need to try to flood the zone with positive affirmative messages and in volume. We created some toolkits to make it easier for us to share our messages and break through the noise. And here's one we wrote about Build Back Better, what it means, some cute little gifts, which talk about do name the policy universal pre-K, but then reframe it as a brownie, which means getting our kids off to a great start in life and the chance to pursue their dreams. This is another toolkit we created in 2018 for candidates running in state elections. A very variety of issues around what it means to be a voter today, what you will get. Even if you're not interested in using these cards, if you're looking for language, it's a great way of just clicking on the links to seeing how things could get, how certain policies might get rephrased. There's a lot of brownies in this. Likewise, sometimes it's just hard to get started. So back to middle school, we created sentence starters, or I guess fourth grade. So we have these 3D sentence starters. We'll pull this up. Most of us believe we all deserve to feel safe in our communities. Then we have some name the villains, a handful of lawmakers, certain politicians, for example, Representative so-and-so. And then the vision, by coming together, when we join together, we can do these. So these are just some examples to get you started, if you so want. And we also have, which we just released last month, strategic policy statements, which are also open source for you to take and use as a jumping off point, if you would like. Everything from COVID, economy, education, and so on. So these are all yours to look at, read, share, and hopefully to give you a starting off point. And in those self-serve materials, the original guides or resources, for the most part, are linked within there, so you can get the sources on that. Okay, so let's just recap. What's the winning message? Well, it starts with a shared value. It should be in a very simple language that an elementary school student would understand and want to repeat to their friends. Talking about shared values. Most of us want our kids to have clean air and water. Ascribes the blame and the harm. So that's really talking about those villains. All stories have a great villain. We should not leave them out. And remember, use that active voice. We want to have tangible outcomes. Again, those are your brownies. We want to provide a vision, and we want to be aspirational. We're going to get rid of the beggars can't be choosers. And we must be talking about what we are for. And just as you won't learn to speak a new language without actually talking to people, you need to practice writing if you're going to be using this. This is a much different way of approaching political speech than most of us have done in the past. We spent hours reworking these messages. We found it really, really helpful to work in a team if you're going to be crafting something on your own. And we encourage people to work in a group, or you could join our Slack. We have a community channel. You'll get the invite in the follow-up email, and to kind of workshop ideas. But it's a real rethinking and of a reframe. But the more you do it, the more you will really start to appreciate this. And I also have said, sometimes just having a framework is great when you are feeling that tapped out of energy, because this is hard work, what we're all doing. And I appreciate everybody being on this call, and it's been a 5 years. Sometimes just having a framework to plop your words in can be so much more helpful. So that's the last plug for that. And lastly, I'm trying to get rid of my taskbar. I don't know why I can't do that. We can do it, guys. So, we are less than 50 days from the first election. Yeah, primaries start in Texas in March. How are we going to get there? How do we get over the finish line in November? Well, we're going to keep organizing. We're going to keep, knocking doors safely, and we're going to be loud. We are going to keep talking about the things we have accomplished. We are going to brag about everything and talk about what we still hope to accomplish. We're going to talk about how our ideas are improving people's lives. We want to continue building coalitions. And that's how we do it, is we lean into those shared values, grounded in family, in country, community. There's a lot of noise out there to distract us. We need to stay laser focused, project confidence, and tell our story. And when we do that, we can do it. So now Lisa's going to lead you in a little pledge. You've gotten this far, so now we're all going to go back to elementary school.
Elementary school. They make me do this because my 3rd and 4th grade teacher made us say the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the Star Spangled Banner and America the Beautiful every single morning. She was very patriotic, I think. Anyhow, so you can all come off of mute now if you want. And if you raise your right hand, we're going to repeat the Strategic Messengers Pledge. We're going to raise your hand and say, I
solemnly swear that will not repeat opposition's words when they talk about organizing people as we work together.
all hands work together. There you go. Thank you so much. We all sound like crazy people. And here after, you can always contact us. And Melissa just forwarded quickly the resources page. You'll be getting a copy of the PDF of the slides. All of these are live links in the PDF. So these are resources. We have some background reading suggestions and some podcast suggestions.